Okay, today we're going to talk about the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Just to review just a little bit some of the causes that caused the Civil War. For example, where going back to 1820, Missouri Compromise, making that line above free, below slave. There were some slave rebellions that made people nervous, usually always unsuccessful, um, but people did worry about them. The Wilmot Proviso, which talked about those new territories that we gained from Mexico, whether those lands would be free or slave, and the Wilmot Proviso wanted them to be free. The Compromise of 1850, which we had to compromise with the South so that we could have a balance of states, so that we could have 15 free states and 15 slave states at the time. We had 30 states in 1850, and California wanted to become free. And that led to tension, and that led to the new fugitive slave law, which people didn't like, returning slaves that had run away. You had Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, which stirred up a lot of mess, dealing with her book about the brutality of slavery in the South. You had Bleeding Kansas. Once the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, you had people running in from Missouri and other states voting in Kansas, voting pro-slavery, and that led anti-slavery and pro-slavery people at each other, which led over to 200 deaths. You had the Dred Scott case, which was a big one. You had the Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney say that slaves are property, they are not citizens, and that you could take your property anywhere. So, which hence, slavery could exist anywhere in the United States. You had John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. We once talked about him in Kansas, dealing with Bleeding Kansas. Now he's back in Virginia, and he raided the arsenal. And of course he was caught, his sons were killed, and he was later hung. You had Lincoln's election, which was kind of the final straw for the South, which then they seceded from the South, and you had the Battle of Fort Sumter, which were the first shots. So today we're going to talk about the Civil War. And I have some video clips on this PowerPoint slide, which I'm not going to show all of them, but I'll show bits and pieces. So when Lincoln was elected, very wise man. He's considered one of the greatest presidents. He brought the country back together. Again, spoiler alert, the North is going to win. Union is going to win. But it's going to have major defeats, especially in the beginning of the war. We are not prepared. Choosing sides. As states, you have to choose sides. And Virginia was kind of split. And the western part of Virginia broke away, which today is West Virginia. Because they did not want to be part of Virginia, which broke away and formed the Confederate States of America. You had 4 slave states. Now this is important. You had Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. They were all slave states, and they decided to stay loyal to the Union. And these states are going to be important throughout the Battle of the Civil War. The North has more population. We're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages here. And the North always had the numbers, which people believed, why did this war last so long? Because the North had so many advantages. There was a draft in 1863, both sides. In the North, you can see not many were drafted. In the South, there were more. In the North, you could get land in the West or claim bounties, and so more people volunteered and then were drafted. But the drafts were always unpopular, and they still are today. So let's talk about those advantages. In the North, or Union, you had 20 million people. You had 22,000 miles of railroads, which hauls, supplies and troops very quickly. You had factories, so that you could have all your clothes, your textile mills, and food and ammunition. The money was in the North. We had most of the ships, and we had most of the firearms. So the South, they only had 9 million people, and 3.6 of them were slaves. They only had 9,000 miles of track, and they only had cash crops to sell. And when we put a blockade around the South, they couldn't make any money. But here's your big ones. The only way we're going to bring the South back into the Union is if we go down there and make them, which means we have to go down there and destroy them. So they have home field advantage. We have to fight them on their home ground. They also have better military leaders. Because of better military leaders, strategy wins the game. They picked the home ground, and their leaders were wise. They knew when to retreat. They knew when to flank. And this was a big one. like Robert E. Lee and others. They were better military leaders. The North's greatest weakness: we could not find military leaders that were strong in the North. Lincoln fired his leaders time and time after again, trying to find someone that would lead him. We finally found our leader in Ulysses S. Grant, who will later become president. So, excellent generals for the South. Again, Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson were two very good generals. Defending is always easier than attacking. They knew the terrain. Farmers fight better than factory workers. But again, they didn't have much to choose from an army, and they had little supplies, which is going to hurt the South quite a bit. If you look at this map, you can see, if you're going to get anywhere, usually you marched. You marched, you marched, you marched. And in the South, they hardly had shoes. They marched barefoot. And so trains is going to be huge to get your supplies and food and troops to certain points. And you can see the North had more railroads. So, talk about plans, and this is important right here. The North's plan was called the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan was surrounding the South. Just like the big snake, it surrounds your prey and squeezes your prey. So we're going to take the Mississippi River. If we do that, we split the Confederacy into two. We're going to set up all our ships around the South so that supplies can't get in or out. That's the other second part of it. And the third part was we wanted to capture their capital of the South, the Confederate States of America, Richmond, Virginia. That was kind of our three-point plan of the Anaconda Plan. In the South, their plan was capture Washington, D.C., seize central Pennsylvania, defend homeland until the North got tired of fighting. Again, there was a battle of attrition to just, outlast the North. Soon the North will get tired of fighting this war and they'll just give up, and the South will be able to become their own country. They also were hoping that maybe Britain or France would join in on their side. I'm not going to show you all these people, these generals right here, but Lincoln went through many, many generals until he found his man, which he always didn't agree with, which was Ulysses S. Grant. Again, for the South, excellent generals: Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, and George Pickett were great generals for the Confederates. I'm not really going to talk about a lot of the battles. That's not really going to be that important. I will talk about a couple of them, especially a couple of the turning point. This was the first one, called the Battle of Bull Run, July of 1861, and everyone expected the North to win. The North had more numbers. We outnumbered them, 3-1. It expected to be quite short, including that, in fact, that people came out on the hillside to their picnic to watch the battle. They thought this would be interesting. The South would get their butt beat, and then the war would eventually be over in a few months. But it didn't turn out that way. In fact, the South is going to win the Battle of Bull Run. In fact, the South is going to win many battles in the first couple of years of the war, 1861 to 1862. Again, better generals. General Thomas Jackson stood there like a stone wall with his Virginia men and made them charge the North. The North was so confused that they retreated. He also had the Battle of the Ironclads. This is the first time in the Civil War you had ironclad ships. And again, like I said before, the South really didn't have any ships. If they had any ships, they actually stole them from the North and refitted them for themselves. And we were just working with different types of iron ships. And here you have the Monitor and the Merrimack, which was stolen. This is the southern ironclad ship, was stolen from the North and renamed. And these two ships, they would do havoc to these types of, your wooden ships. And wooden ships would fire their cannonballs, and they would just bounce off these heavy iron-plated ships. And so this is the first time, the Navy you think of that we have today, comes from these types of ironclad ships. Now these two did meet in battle, and it was a draw, and neither one could sink the other. This war is going to be deadly. In fact, if you have all our wars combined, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, all the wars you can think of, the Civil War was the bloodiest. Of course, we were fighting each other, and we had over 700,000 casualties in this war. You had the Gatling gun, which was kind of like a machine gun that you spin with a handle and it just shoots out. You had the revolving pistol. You had the repeating rifle. You had the mini ball. And the rifles now they could shoot a lot further distance and more accurate with their grooved barrels.
The North against South. Brother against brother, with terrible deadlock. Bringing death on a scale never previously seen in warfare. Here at a metalworks in Springfield, Illinois, molten lead is beginning its journey, becoming a lethal instrument of destruction. The bullet known as the mini ball. This crude piece of lead is the primary reason for the unprecedented levels of slaughter in this war. Invented in France, just an ounce in weight and half an inch across, one person can cast 3,000 mini balls an hour. Each one of these simple bullets can rip through a man's body in a fraction of a second. The mini ball is used by North and South alike. Demand for this killer bullet runs so high that an entire industry springs up, supplying mini balls to the front line. In total, the North makes over 500 million mini balls, ready to be fired from the 2 million muskets it supplies to its men.
In many ways, the Civil War was the first modern war because it was the first war that took place after the Industrial Revolution had begun to transform our country.
It will take over 33 hours for a bullet in this box to travel the 800 plus miles to the battlefield, ready to find its target. The new musket is much faster to reload than traditional weapons. Load the gunpowder, ram down the bullet, and it's ready to fire.
Imagine warfare where your ability to load a musket faster than the guy with the other musket would determine if you lived or died.
Grooves on the inside of the barrel, rifling, spin the ball toward its target. The improved accuracy and range are a deadly combination.
1 second, everything's great. The next second, your buddy's head's gone, or his arm's flying off.
you don't want to know what a soft metal musket ball does when it enters the human body.